It's a quick transition, but traditionally at this conference, the leader of the LGBTQ Victory Institute has an opportunity to update everyone who is here on the state of the organization and the state of the movement. And I'm going to do that now. 50 years ago, a bar was raided by New York City police officers. It wasn't the first time, it wouldn't be the last time. But in that moment in history, in June of 1969, our community, led by queer people of color and gender nonconforming people, sparked a movement that transformed our journey from isolation toward liberation. The Stonewall Uprising laid the foundation for what was to come. Our first pride parades, a network of advocacy organizations, and our first openly LGBTQ people elected to public office. A new era of LGBTQ political power was born out of the brave actions of those who stood up at Stonewall. And now, 50 years later in the United States, America has elected us at nearly every level of government. Nearly. We're working on that last one. In 2019 alone, more than 380 LGBTQ candidates ran for elective office here, and nearly 151 on Election Day. This was the year of the lesbian mayor, with 3 big city lesbian mayors elected in the United States. Lori Lightfoot, now the mayor of Chicago, becoming the highest-ranking LGBTQ mayor in U.S. history. She did take that title from me, and I have absolutely no problem with that, of course. But Jane Castor won her mayoral race in Tampa and is the first big city lesbian mayor in the Southeast. And Sacha Rhodes Conway was elected the first LGBTQ mayor of Madison, Wisconsin. But we also saw, just in the last month, Claudia Lopez being elected the mayor of Bogota, Colombia, a city of more than 7 million people. Lesbian and bisexual women city council members were elected for the first time in Indianapolis and Boston. LGBTQ representation was restored to the Atlanta City Council. 6 trans leaders were elected on this November election day, including Virginia delegate Danica Rome, who defeated another transphobic opponent to pull off her re-election. We have a lot to celebrate. And when these newly elected officials take office, there will be more than 800 of us serving across the country here. And I encourage you to visit that map outside to see where we are. But as you know, there's still far to go. We need to elect 22,000 more LGBTQ people here in America before we achieve equitable representation. And our opponents are testing new weapons. Our opponents are finding new ways to try to keep us from successfully running for office, and even to remove us from office once elected. As we speak, our opponents are pushing a narrative that certain communities will not vote for LGBTQ candidates. It is a narrative that's been perpetuated against us for decades, whispered behind the scenes, hoping to raise questions about our viability and scare voters into choosing someone more safe or straight. But what was once whispers are now New York Times stories and Washington Post columns. Right now, some pundits and opposition candidates are pushing the lie that black voters will not vote for an LGBTQ candidate. It is wrong. It is wrong factually, according to opinion polls. It is wrong morally because it treats the black community as monolithic and ignores LGBTQ black voices like those in the room. And it is wrong empirically because we see LGBTQ candidates winning the hearts and minds of black voters across this nation. I just mentioned Lori Lightfoot. She knows it. She claimed victory in her Chicago mayoral race with an astounding 73% of the vote, winning all 50 wards in Chicago. Malcolm Kenyatta knows it. He easily bested 4 primary opponents in his Pennsylvania state legislative race, even though homophobic flyers were distributed just before Election Day. Neil Rafferty knows it. This past April, he was elected to represent a majority black district in the Alabama House of Representatives, becoming the only openly LGBTQ elected official in the entire state. And I know it, with significant black support in all of my races in Houston. LGBTQ candidates have proven that when voters get to know us, when they learn about our lives and agree with our issues and priorities, our sexual orientations and gender identities become just one part of our story. And a judgment is made based on who we are as leaders. The most important thing, who we are as leaders. Real harm is done by these narratives. It can discourage us from running in certain communities, religious, racial, ethnic, or otherwise, allowing these myths to fester even further. It is the elected officials in this room and those we need to run in the future who will eventually dispel these myths. But for now, our opponents seemed determined to use them. But questioning our viability is not the only weapon being wielded. Political operatives and opponents are also attempting to sensationalize the lives of LGBTQ candidates and elected officials, to brand us, once again, as sexual outliers, as others, exploiting our sexuality to distract from the issues and what makes us qualified leaders. It's nothing new, of course, but it has been given new life because of smartphones, dating apps, and endless streams of emails and text messages. The reality is that most people, especially young adults, now have personal photos or messages they would not want to be widely shared. I bet every one of you in here has something you don't want your mother to see. It's a double standard, but our opponents know that when it is an LGBTQ candidate or elected official's private life that is exposed, they can whip up more furor and controversy. Most recently, former U.S. Representative Katie Hill resigned following a massive release of her personal photos to right-wing media outlets determined to take her down. They put forward, and her opponents grabbed and amplified, a message, photos and a storyline driven by biphobia and sexism, condemning her for actions that straight, cisgender congressmen have so often gotten away with in the past. And while she is the most high-profile example, her story is one of many. In Texas last year, a young gay city council member in his first term was removed from office in a recall election that took place after his opponents leaked photos of him from Grindr. And this year alone, several LGBTQ candidates were targeted with even the most innocent of personal photos, doctored in an attempt to distract from real issues and refocus attention on their sexual orientation or gender identity. The efficacy of these attacks varies, but they have an insidious and profound effect on whether LGBTQ people, and especially young people, pursue a career in public service. More will be hesitant to run if these attacks are normalized. They see what happened to Representative Hill and that young gay man in Texas, and understandably worry about being vulnerable to similar life-altering political tactics. We are seeing the impact in victory. At our candidate and campaign trainings, participants are asking with more frequency about whether personal photos or a history using dating apps will prevent them from running successfully. Will a vengeful ex destroy their chances at a public service career? I'm afraid it's a problem that will get worse before it gets better. As a community, we need to condemn these attacks forcefully until they are no longer politically successful. We need to show up-and-coming leaders if they become targets. They will not be abandoned, that we have their backs. And the new weapons targeting LGBTQ leaders are, of course, not unique to the United States. And they get worse. In Europe, South America, and Africa, opponents of equality are shifting strategies. Instead of pushing an anti-LGBTQ agenda from outside government, they aim to infect institutions from within. They are using religion and populism to grow or found new political parties, and reducing LGBTQ political participation is among their primary goals. This is their response to the increasing number of our voices in elective office, and they see it as a zero-sum game. Either an LGBTQ or allied elected official holds a seat and influences policy, or they do. I'm afraid we have to see it in the same way. Nationalist parties are on the rise in Germany, Poland, and Hungary. Fundamentalists are financing evangelical, so-called evangelical candidates in Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Brazil. When the horribly anti-LGBTQ Brazilian President Bolsonaro took office at the beginning of this year, Jean Willis, the first openly gay man elected to Brazil's parliament, saw an immediate and dramatic uptick in homophobic death threats. Within a month of Bolsonaro taking office, he was forced to flee the country and resign from parliament. And with good reason, less than a year earlier, his close friend, Marielle Franco, a bisexual councilwoman in Rio de Janeiro, was assassinated because of her outspoken advocacy on behalf of LGBTQ and other marginalized communities. This is what we're up against in an increasing number of countries. It is a battle for representation and political power, and our opponents are determined to drive us out of office and deter others from joining and running. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list of the new political weapons LGBTQ candidates and elected officials are facing. And the solutions are multifaceted and complicated. But I firmly believe we must play offense and dramatically grow the number of LGBTQ people running for office. That is the most direct and effective response. If more diverse LGBTQ candidates run in more diverse communities, no longer will pundits say we cannot win certain voters. If more of us run in more places, we become more visible, eroding the ability of opponents to sensationalize our lives through personal photos or messages. And if we run in countries where populist and fundamentalist policies are growing, we can be counter voices to their efforts to dehumanize us. It is that belief in the power of representation to move our community forward that fuels our work at the Victory Institute, here in the United States and around the globe. Witness the panel we just had. In 2019, nearly 1,000 LGBTQ leaders participated in our programs, all aimed at building a pipeline, growing the ranks, and strengthening our network of LGBTQ elected officials. We held candidate trainings in low-equality states, Alabama, Florida, Montana, and Nebraska, and in countries, Colombia, Guatemala, Honduras, and South Africa. We put 169 future candidates through our 4-day boot camp-style candidate training, and the graduates were the most diverse in our 28-year history. We provided 12 young LGBTQ students, once again, a paid summer internship on Capitol Hill, and provided 10 LGBTQ leaders of color, an annual program, and trans leaders with a year-long fellowship, helping them advance their candidacies for office. And in partnership with the David Bennett Foundation, we sent 6 state legislators to a 3-week leadership development course at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And in Bogota, Colombia, in partnership with Caribe Afirmativo, we brought together more than 300 LGBTQ leaders from across Latin America, the Caribbean, the United States, and Canada to exchange ideas and build an international front in the movement for LGBTQ power across the Americas. And of course, we work to strengthen our network by bringing all of you together. at the largest gathering of LGBTQ elected officials anywhere in the world. More than 550 of you are attending this conference, each of you with a unique perspective, policy expertise, or skill sets that can be taken back to your state legislatures, to your school boards, to your advocacy organizations. LGBTQ elected officials, like many of you in this room, are in a unique position. You are first and foremost public servants for your constituents. But as out leaders, you have an added responsibility to act as role models and advocates for our community. It is our effectiveness in changing hearts and minds and moving equality forward that has our opponents trying these new methods, strengthening their attacks, testing new weapons to prevent us from increasing our representation in government. And it's not just those of you who are in office today or plan to run. Every one of us in this room has a role in this fight. The challenges our opponents present are real. Qualified LGBTQ people may decide elected office is not worth the battle. But it is our job, all of us, to remind up-and-coming leaders of why we need LGBTQ people to run, to ensure they understand the impact of an LGBTQ voice in the halls of power, to tell them it is worth the risk, worth the battle. Some of us in this room have been doing this a very long time, and we have seen the world change, but we haven't finished yet. It wasn't easy for the elected officials who came before us. It wasn't easy for patrons of Stonewall to throw rocks and bottles at people with guns and riot gear. But achieving equality has never been easy. It is a fight, and we need more fighters. We will fight on together. Thank you for being here, being a part of this.
Please welcome to the stage Colorado State